The purpose of this exercise is to look at an object in front of you and start being able to see the different values according to whether the side of the object is facing the light or the side of the object is facing away from the light. To start this, I started with a piece of paper that I folded up and I have it setting in front of me. I'm using all the other techniques for drawing to start this drawing. So I'm using things like sighting and measuring, basic shapes as I start here. I'm starting with very light lines, and so you're just seeing kind of me starting the very basic shapes. And then as I start to get more of the drawing complete, I can keep correcting the sizes and placements of things. And so you can kind of see that I'm using a kneaded eraser, and because my lines are light, I can quickly readjust a line as I go. My subject is lit by a single light source so that it only casts one set of shadows, and that way you don't get a bunch of different confusing shadows and lights. So you can see my light is coming from kind of the upper right hand corner, and that makes it kind of an easy light setup to tell which sides of the paper are facing the light and which sides of the piece of paper are facing away from the light. As you draw, avoid making your outlines very dark. We don't want outlines in the final drawing, because if you look at the piece of paper that I'm looking at, there's not a black line going around all the edges. In real life, there's not. We don't live in a coloring book world that has these black outlines around everything. We see an edge because there's a difference in value. So every time a plane changes or there's an edge somewhere, that we see that with our eyes because one side's lighter and one side's darker. When I start this drawing, I'm just starting with the dark value. So I squint at the subject to see the values better, and I'm just starting to fill in just everything that's that I see that's dark. Later I can go back and I can maybe separate those darks into a very dark black and a dark gray, let's say. But for now, I'm just getting those shadows in there. You can see that I'm resting my hand on a scrap piece of paper. That keeps my palm from smudging my paper as I go. Simplify the value structure as you draw. So only break down the subject into 3 or 4 different values. So a light, like a white, a black, maybe a gray if you're doing 3 values, or white, black, light gray, and dark gray. You don't have to get all 10 values in here. In fact, a lot of artists will simplify the values down in their artworks to having fewer values here. So for this to be a learning exercise, keep the number of values small. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going into all those shadow areas that I started darkening, and I'm kind of darkening the darkest darks, which would be your occlusion shadows, so the cast shadows that are getting no reflected light in them, and I'm darkening some of the core shadows on the objects that are also not getting any reflected light on them. And next, I'm going in and I'm adding in a light gray. So the parts of the paper that are facing the light but aren't directly facing the light, they may be turned away slightly, are a light gray. So I'm going in with those and using a light pressure. I did switch to an H pencil, but you don't have to. To get those halftones or those light grays, you could just simply take any pencil and just use a very, very light pressure. So to do that, I hold the pencil farther back. I don't grip it very tightly. I grip it very loosely and just barely let the pencil touch the paper. In this final sketch, you can see that I have probably 4 values. I have a white, a light gray, a dark gray, and black for the darkest shadows. Also, pay attention to hard edges versus soft edges that you see in the subject. So there's some places that you see that it switches suddenly from a lighter value to a darker value, and there's a very crisp, hard, clean edge. Other places, it transitions more slowly from a lighter value to a darker value, so there's more of a gradation in values there. There are also a couple lost edges here too, so maybe the top of that bottom curve and the back piece of the paper there where the kind of gray goes into the gray of the background. Where I see the edge of the paper being lighter than the background, I went ahead and filled in the background just being a light gray so that I can avoid putting a black outline there.